wrestling later on, and we'll get into that. But I'm in the metropolis of Fayetteville, Tennessee, population 22,000. Now, I'll tell you what, I know it's hard for you in Toronto to keep up with us, but we're gonna we're gonna try. But yes, you can. I will actually give out my personal email because I do have listeners that call in or that write me. It is M as in Mark, B as in Brenda, J as in Jessica, A as in Ashley, A as in Austin, S as in Smith, mbjaas@gmail.com. You can also reach me through Facebook, IRA, Mark Smith. That's Ira Mark Smith. On Instagram, I am Mark Smith WCW. That stands for World Championship Wrestling. That's really when I hit the big time in pro wrestling. And our website is www.wrestlingwithdemonsmith, and that's with two S's, Demon Smith, wrestlingwithdemonsmith.com. So between all that, if you're a stalker, you should be able to find me.
So, Mark, I guess my first question too is something, but actually, before I ask my first question, I want to share that that title when you said wrestling with demons, and it brought me to a point where many of us we have demons that we are battling, either from the
Sure.
past, the present, and there's so many demons that are going to come up in our future, right? Because unfortunately, we live in a world where there's a lot of suffering and there's a lot of pain associated with that. So, for you, what are some of the struggles that you went through that you would identify maybe as your demons or how you were
Sure,
wrestling with it?
sure. Well, I feel like many of the demons I fought we see in society today. I mean, why would people take someone out of a vehicle and beat them to death for no reason? Why does that kind of stuff happen? Why do shootings happen? These school shootings. I'm just curious. In Canada, are you getting larger amounts of school shootings like we are here in the U.S.?
We are having an increase in violence when it comes to car thefts and breaking and entering is high here. But in Canada, we always look to our American friends when it came to the shooting because you guys average a shooting a day.
It's awful. It is awful. And so my demons, okay, being reared in a broken home, also a father, and my father was beaten with chains when he was a child. I mean, literal steel chains. He had never been able to process anything about it. So all of that pain, all of that aggression was passed over to the next generation, which was us. And not being able to process things, I feel like number one, that is probably the biggest demon that we have to face. And that is we don't admit that they're there. It's like an alcoholic. When I hear alcoholics speak, they say one of the freeing moments is them saying, hello, I'm Joe or I'm John and I'm an alcoholic. They owe up to that. You cannot fight a problem. You cannot deal with a problem unless you recognize the problem is there. And, too many people live in the state of denial, and I'm not talking about the river. Okay. Okay, that was cheap humor, okay? But the demons, when you're brought up in a broken home and things are not as solid or concrete, number one, your foundation is a little bit shaken. Who am I? That's an incredible demon. Think about the number of people. Well, if you remember, and I don't, I you've got a couple of gray hairs, you may remember with me. But the kid at that time, he's a grown-up man now, that because of, he says, reading The Catcher in the Rye, he shot John Lennon. Why? He wanted an identity. Hey, I did this. I went down in history. You're, unless you know who you are, you're very lost in this life. Likewise, at the same point, we are fed so much crap, whatever you want to call it, from everything from TV ads to celebrities endorsing this and that and everything else. We're young people are being told from every direction that this will make you somebody, or this will make you somebody, or this will make you somebody. You know what? I'm 57. I had to think about that. I'm 57. And I don't want to go back to being a teenager in today's time. But identity, your purpose, how to achieve it. What is really success? What is really happiness? Does that mean you just didn't get in a fight today? I mean, when you think about it, and all these, they're like little demons that you're fighting inside your soul. I think it'd drive anybody to being crazy. I mean, it would drive anybody to be crazy, really. It would drive me to be crazy. And so, just for us opening up, I think you talk about demons, those were demons that I dealt with. And I hope that kind of answers the question.
It does. It does. And there's a point where you mentioned success and happiness. And I just finished having a conversation with my friends maybe an hour ago about this. And I
Wow.
was telling her that is your happiness defined by what others can do for you? Or is your happiness defined on what you can do for yourself? And she sat back and she was like, I was like, exactly. We are shown that we get a relationship to complete us. It is the end of that journey. But I told her, look at it as the beginning of a new one. You see, when you get married, and this is where probably going to catch a little bit of heat, so I do apologize to the women in advance. There's many people who would say that women view marriage as the end. I got married, I'm complete, I'm going to have my child, and I'm going to ride off into the sunset. My husband and I, fantastic life. Dog named Sparky, white picket fence, and we're golden, the American dream.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's some men that will look at it, or some people that will look at it and say that I got married. Now it's time to build. What are you building? The family crest, the family legacy, right? Because if you
Mm-hmm.
take it back to traditional roles, men are usually the builder and women are the nurturer, right? The man will build a home, the woman will grow it. There's
Right.
two different perspectives, right? So the reason why I pointed this out to her, I was letting her know that as I got older in age, I wanted someone to spend good times with, big smiles with, and create memories. Everything else is secondary. Right? And that's what I always want. And I think growing up, similar to you, where I didn't have the foundation that maybe was ideal for a productive child. I grew up in a broken home. I didn't know my parents
Mm-hmm.
until I was 5 years old.
Okay.
And I struggled quite a bit because my grandmother did everything that she could for me. And she was very good at masking some of the pain. But once you separate from your grandma, then you realize, wait a minute, why are the other kids' parents, why don't they look as old as my parent? Why are they more mobile? Why are they more active? So that was a demon that I began to challenge myself with. And for you, when you mentioned the success, the happiness, how can we as an individual person find that in your opinion?
Okay, I'm glad you said in my opinion. You know, I am a Christian, but in the same respect, I'm not someone that Bible thumps somebody. You know what I mean? Okay. And so all I can do is talk about my story the things that happened to me that I just could not ignore. Now, we're seeing a lot of the same stuff. What I found out that I needed, and you can tell me how you feel about this, is that you cannot find anything really. You cannot build a house. You cannot do anything without a foundation. So, I love what you told her. My other thought would be, what is your foundation? Because if you've got a firm foundation, the storms will come, but you will never be knocked off that foundation. And for me, it was when I left the wrestling business. Get this, this is true now. I get stopped walking into a hardware store. A man in overalls taps me. His pointer finger was probably as big as my wrist, and I got good sized wrists, but he pointed and I looked back at him like, what the heck? He said, son, I have a word for you. And I had never heard that term before. Okay, so I'm like, have a word for me? You tap me like that, I'm gonna have a few extra words for you, Bella. I mean, you get where I'm coming from. He said, you do not have to go to school for the rest of your life to be a minister. Thank you, sir. And I just said that to be polite. It was like, get out of my face. Over the next 6 months, 7 other times, different people stopped me that I did not know and told me the exact same thing. Son, I have a word for you. That's the way it all started. Too much, so much to the point that Brenda and I are in a church service. And I say, I'd already been married once at that point, and I was hell on earth. I'll be quite honest with you. I didn't deserve anything because I was finding my foundation. I mean, when you don't have a foundation that stabilizes you emotionally and intellectually, then we can be open to listening to anything anybody says and halfway believing it. We've got to have a foundation. In my belief. I said, all right, God, look, got a question. If I'm going to be married, okay. If I'm going to be single the rest of my life, okay. I'd like to know what you're talking about here. All right. Now that I'll tell you what. Now that is some kind of a sweet Christian prayer, isn't it? I mean, when you think about it, it wasn't no. No, it's sound like something from Beetlejuice, right? Just talking straight up. This woman that was behind me. Now, if she was a brunette, her hair had probably gone from brown or black to silver to white to blue, and it was purple. She looked like Barney the dinosaur. Okay. Tap, tap, tap. Yes, ma'am. Son, I have a word for you. No, no, no more words. I'm tired of this. No more words. Stop it. The answer to your prayer is beside you. Now, Brenda, my wife Brenda, we've been married going on 32 years now. Okay. She was on my right, and some 75-year-old geezer was on my left. Quite honest with you, in that comparison, Brenda looked a lot better. But you know what? I was stubborn. I believed if you had a foundation on something, it better be logical. If there's something supernatural about it, there better be some proof. I mean, solid proof. And so I wasn't one of these people that stepped into a church and went, whoa, all that. I walked into a church I remember after leaving the wrestling business, I walked into a church, and I'm thinking, all right, I want to see who's faking here. So for me, it was a foundation. Now I'm sorry to mouth off so much on the other, but it was because I wanted the listeners to understand. Look, I had to be convinced. You get what I mean? And sometimes being convinced, and if something's true and being convinced of it, sometimes God bless us all. Sometimes we got truth staring us in the face, and we don't want to deal with it because it's too hard to deal with. But we don't. We all need a foundation in our life, and I'm glad I've got a foundation in my life that's built on love and trust. I apologize for being so mouthy. Okay.
No, that's perfect because that would lead me to find out how were you able to build that foundation or find out that the foundation that you have is the right one for you.
It was those people tapping me, things being said to me that I had been thinking about, and they were giving me the answers. I mean, I had to be freaked out. I really did. I was stubborn. As a kid, I went to church, and my dad would sit in the choir. Now I knew how my dad was, and I'm thinking, who else up there is like him? Probably everybody. They probably go home and slap their kids around. So if you know what I'm talking about here, sometimes it's easier to talk to somebody if they know nothing about a subject than if they know a little bit. Okay. I had been in that church scene, so I was harder to be convinced that church could be a good place or that God, all right. Because when you know, later on, we might get to the point of what led me to this. Do you want me to cover that right now? Okay. All right. I'd been wrestling for several years. I'd become scum of the earth. I was not physically, but emotionally, verbally, everything else. I was abusive. When I would be home, I would be sitting in a recliner. My weed would be wrapped up beside me. I had beer, and then I had that was on my right side. On my left side, I had a cooler that had beer, and then I had liquor. I thought it was because of all the physical pain. What I didn't understand was I was hurting emotionally too. I was ready. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation asked me to come up to the sheriff's office. I'd been wrestling, like I said, for several years. And I walked in, and they said, Mark, we need you to have a seat. I said, yeah. They said, we've got you on tape. I said, tape about what? Well, I know we know you were buying steroids, and we know you were talking to others about steroids. They played me a little